If you can manage the distance, you can manage the damage, which gives you the ability to survive long enough to capitalize on opportunities. And this is the superpower of jiu-jitsu that attracts nerds like you and I that are not the most athletic people. And when people are first learning jiu-jitsu, what they came for is the ability to survive long enough to counterattack. And it works all the way up to the highest level of the sport, as we've seen multiple times Gordon Ryan attacking and Felipe Pena countering to take his back and win the match. But if we take that same approach and use it to pass a knee shield, we're hoping that they're going to go for some attack and we're going to be able to land in chest-to-chest half guard. But the majority of the time, it results in us just running into a frame while we wait for an opportunity to come and the crowd gets restless. Or an even worse scenario is we just sit there and we get stuck in these cycles of defense, where we get off balanced one way and as we're recovering, they invert underneath and now they're attacking our legs. Now, I wish I could remember where this analogy came from, but I can't, so I'm going to paraphrase and butcher it for us. But the basic idea is that beginner surfers are just trying to survive and not get pummeled by waves. But as you get better, you learn to navigate the ocean more and put yourself in position to catch waves when they come. And this makes you an intermediate surfer. But advanced surfers have the ability to make a wave out of anything. Now, the people watching this video, I assume, know how to navigate through the positions of jiu-jitsu. So we're not going to talk about the beginners trying to survive. I'm talking to the intermediate people that are trying to become advanced. And the difference between intermediate and advanced people is that advanced people make their own waves. So if you're sitting there just driving into a knee shield, what you're hoping for is an opportunity to arise. You're hoping that they decide to put their foot on the ground and try and hip escape. And by doing so, they clear the knee shield for you and you're able to get chest to chest. But if we just sit in someone's guard and they're good, they're going to take their grips and they're going to go into their attacks. So we want to avoid just sitting and waiting for that wave to come, because sometimes there just isn't a swell.
You should have been here yesterday. We had a sweet swell yesterday. I mean, I was doing some layback 360s and floaters. It was insane.
Wow! So to put this in Danaher terminology, if we're the one initiating offensive cycles, that means we're striving to be advanced and create waves ourselves. And yes, sometimes it won't work out and sometimes you'll be beaten. But if you strive to be this definition of advanced and initiate offensive cycles and continue to develop your skills, in my opinion, on a long enough timeline, you're going to be much better than the person who is content with counterattacking. Shh. The knee shield is one of the most annoying things to deal with in jiu-jitsu, and whenever we ask someone how to deal with it, we never seem to get a straight answer. So we turn to Google and we ask how to pass the knee shield. And we find video after video of world champions showing us to weave our hand through their legs, grab their head, and pass to north-south. So then we go try that, but every time we do it, they invert underneath us and put us back in guard. So we say, okay, that didn't work, but I've seen Cole do this same exact pass, and as his opponent inverts, he transitions to a double underpass. So you try that and it works, but it's hard to finish a double underpass sometimes. So then you see Josh finish his double underpass by chopping down the arm of his opponent. Now that, I think, is a very logical way of going about developing your guard passing. But let's break down what we just did. We went on to a platform like BJJ 365, Submeta, or BJJ Fanatics, learned a technique and applied that technique in training. Now the idea behind the technique is that we're running into a frame, and because we can't go through frames, we try and go around it. But as we're trying to go around it, we never address the fact that our opponent's knee is still inside of our collarbone. And if we're trying to pass to north-south, we would need to take that knee that's on our collarbone and pull it out, which would allow us to get chest to chest and complete the pass. But it's a slightly different situation here, and it's difficult to do. And because we can't just power ourselves through frames, we get put back into guard. So then we say to ourselves, okay, the frame follows us as we're going to north-south. So if I'm able to take my weave hand out and get underneath that frame, I can redirect it and go into my double underpass. So we've identified the frame that's giving us trouble, and we're trying to figure out a way to deal with that frame and allow us to continue in an offensive cycle to pass the guard. When you compare that to a situation where we hit a nice Toriando out to an angle, but our opponent is able to successfully high leg over and establish a solid frame. If we just try to plow through that frame, that is when we get put in defensive cycles. So the first rule that we have that's going to keep us in an offensive cycle when passing the guard is to respect frames. The second thing that we have to respect are grips. And when I say this, I really don't mean just breaking grips really aggressively as you back away, because if we're doing that, we're already in a defensive cycle. What I mean is that if someone is grabbing our foot, it's probably not a good idea to move that foot and try a knee cut, because it's probably not going to work. And even if it does work, it's going to work very slowly, and they're going to be able to reestablish their frames and go into counterattacks. So I'm definitely not saying that a knee cut is not a good technique. If they're initially grabbing your ankle and as they sit up, they let go of it, it could be a great opportunity to shoot for a knee cut. But if they are grabbing your ankle, a better option might be something like a leg drag where you don't need to move that foot. So the basic idea is if they're grabbing your feet, don't move your feet. If they're not grabbing your feet, move your feet. So here we see Craig stuck in reverse de la Riva and Kyle has a strong grip on his foot. So he says, cool, I'm gonna do a little baseball slide here so I can loosen up your hook and get 2 V grips on your legs. And from here, I'm gonna go into a C grip leg drag. And if you're not familiar with the C grip leg drag, that means you probably don't have the best value on the internet today, and that is Submeta, that you can try for less than $10 for your first month if you use the code down in the description. But Craig kind of hits the lazy version of this leg drag because Lachlan really emphasizes that you want their foot in your armpit and you want to really be turning them to their other hip. And that brings me to another point, that we don't need to be doing all of these attacks at 100%. We just need to be displaying some sort of forward motion so they respect it and we stay in offensive cycles. This footage came from our community where we break down each other's rolling footage. And you can see the top player tries a pretty lame knee cut pass, but it was good enough so the bottom player had to respect it, which set up this throw by follow-up. We see Craig hitting that lazy C grip leg drag and Kyle is still grabbing his leg, not respecting it. So Craig says, okay, I'm gonna jam your near knee by and go in for a pass. The whole time never moving his foot. But now Kyle respects the pass, lets go of Craig's leg and frames away with his hands. Now the next time Craig goes in for this leg drag, he's a bit more aggressive with it and it forces Kyle to let go of his foot right away and frame with his hands. So now Craig again beautifully sets up this C grip leg drag and it forces Kyle to let go of his leg and frame with his hands. And as Kyle recovers his leg position, he had to do so by relinquishing control of Craig's foot, which means that Craig's foot is now free to move through that huge space that was just created. And that is how we stay in offensive cycles, by respecting frames and respecting grips. Now, one interesting thing is that people tend to just fall into the guard, and when that doesn't work, they get defensive and they back out, or they just step right into the guard to engage, giving their opponent these grips right away. And we might initiate with a beautiful grip fighting sequence to grab our opponent's foot and put them supine. But then by just stepping into reverse de la Riva, we allow them to get a grip and now it puts us back in the defensive cycle. And sure, we can still pass from there, but it's much more of us just sitting, waiting for an opportunity to come and hoping we can ride that wave when it does. And this is something that I was definitely guilty of up until about a couple weeks ago. And the reason I did it is because I watched Gordon's first instructional, and he emphasizes that you want to step one foot to a straight hamstring or a cross hamstring, and if you're able to get your foot inside, that allows you to go into things like this fancy pummeling. And we see Gordon doing this in competition with success. But I think it's important to remember that even though he's the best in the world, his opinions can change. And even though he was still flexing on the haters back in the day,
yeah, well, things changed a little bit since high school.
I think if you showed Gordon Ryan a video of himself doing this strategy, I think he would now tell you that there's better things you should be doing. When I look at this, the times I see it be the most successful is in transition, where you pummel your feet to this headquarters position. Your opponent has no grips on your legs and you're able to chain attacks very quickly. So maybe you're stuck in a butterfly half guard and you can't quite pummel your outside foot in. So instead you decide to pummel your inside foot out. And now you can pummel both your feet from the outside to the inside, which puts you in that headquarters position. And your opponent has no grips on your feet, giving you the ability to do a quick knee cut. So I really believe that we need to rethink the idea of just stepping our foot inside of our opponent's legs. Because one, that gives them the ability to take their grips and go into offensive cycles. And number two, if that's your primary objective and you're tunnel visioned on getting your foot inside of their legs, they can position their legs in a way that makes that practically impossible to do. And when you do try, they steal the inside position from you and go into their attacks. And both of these scenarios completely kill our offensive cycle and put us on the defensive. So instead of starting with a linear approach and growing straight up the middle, it seems that the new wave guys are starting to take a more circular approach and threaten angles first. That can result in a very quick guard pass if they're not respected. If we watch Gordon here passing a butterfly half guard, he starts out by standing up and playing a bit more defensive game, trying to untangle himself from his opponent's guard. But once he does finally untangle himself, he's immediately threatening angles. And because Philip does not want to get past, he starts reaching with his bottom leg. And Gordon tries to capitalize on that space and stay in an offensive cycle by shooting a quick knee cut. But it doesn't work, and Gordon gets caught in half guard with a standard knee shield. But immediately starts to go into another offensive cycle by standing standing up and starting to free his foot. And by the time Philip is able to grab Gordon's foot, it's not a meaningful grip at all. So hopefully you can see this is much different than just stepping into De La Riva or reverse De La Riva and allowing your opponent to take a very solid grip. And the difference is that Gordon is no longer just stepping into De La Riva or reverse De La Riva, and instead his opponent is just trying to desperately recover some sort of guard. And because they are recovering, that means that they are still in a defensive cycle. And Gordon is able to keep flowing through these offensive cycles until his opponent is basically like, dude, I don't even want to reach out with my foot anymore to catch your leg. So Gordon says, okay, if you're not going to respect it, then I'll pass. And this is how we create our own waves instead of just waiting for one to come to us. And the point of all of this is to make your opponent think to themselves, thank God I was able to recover to chest half guard.
Is they will start desperately reaching with their bottom leg to get to your leg and trap it.
And when
I see this,
right, that's
we
amazing.
flatten him out, and now he's bottom half guard, chest to chest, and this is exactly where I want it to be the whole time.
So in my opinion, the reason why we never seem to get a straight answer on how to pass a knee shield is because we're asking it from the mindset of survive long enough to counterattack. And we're hoping for that one magical technique that will allow us to do so. Now for self-defense, sure, the survive long enough to counterattack approach is great. But in terms of competition jiu-jitsu, I really think this will only take you so far, especially when it comes to guard passing. Because the guard passers that I want to emulate are the ones that are leading the dance and staying in offensive cycles. And when making this video, I thought it was more important to stress our mindset behind passing the knee shield as opposed to individual techniques. But at the end of the day, we definitely need to get down into the weeds and talk about what I believe are the best ways to get past a knee shield and how to implement those techniques into your training so you can truly become an advanced guard passer. Now, if you want to know my favorite way to get past the knee shield, check the description below and download the free PDF. But please realize that this is a problem that people deal with for years and still don't have the answer to. But my goal during my little hiatus while I was waiting for my new computer was to think of a way to give you all the best answer I could possibly think of at this time. So I've outlined a course that condenses the hundreds of hours of instructional and match study that I've done and the months of experimenting myself into what I believe to be the most effective ways to deal with the knee shield and how to go about drilling and practicing those techniques so you can chain them together and truly become a very scary guard passer. Now, some of you may be saying to yourself, that sounds a little bit like a fundraiser for your new computer, but if this course comes out the way I'm envisioning, it's gonna save you months, if not years, of frustration dealing with the knee shield and give you a clear sense of direction that seems to be harder and harder to get nowadays with the amount of information at our fingertips. Now, a lot has happened since I broke my computer, and I really wanna do just a compilation of a bunch of different ways to beat a knee shield, but first I want to talk to you guys about Gordon and Nicky Rod, which is what I think we're going to talk about next week. So we'll see you then.